Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Seafarer Social Podcast. I have a fantastic guest with me today. As you all know, on the Seafarer Social Podcast, we primarily focus on speaking to seafarers, but every so often we go off the beaten path and speak to somebody whose decisions impact the lives of seafarers. And as such, today I'm joined by Tim Coffin. Tim is the CEO of Tristar Eships in Dubai. I first come across Tim a few months ago back at the Dubai Maritime Week, in which he was doing a panel with the Mission to Seafarers. And when I was listening to his perspective on reviewing a decade of the Happiness Index, but also some of the initiatives he's doing at Tristar with seafarers, I thought it would be really cool to have him on today. So before we go any further, Tim, thank you very much for joining us. How are you?
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I feel very honored to have a little bit of your time. So let's get straight into it, Tim. Tell us about your career.
Well, I've always been in shipping. I started out my career in the 1990s running old bulk carriers around Latin America, and I'm originally from the US. And I ended up in the UK, went to business school, ran a research desk for a tanker broker, and then was involved in a company that hedged dry bulk physical against dry bulk paper. We didn't know it at the time, but it turned out that it was a hedge fund, and so suddenly we were able to raise a lot of money, which was great and fascinating from a business point of view. From there, I went to Navigate, where I was involved in the capital markets activities of the group. It was involved in Navigate in those days was involved in several publicly listed companies in Oslo and eventually the US. But I missed the sharp end of vessel operations and the day-to-day activity of owning and operating ships. So I joined a London-based Norwegian ship owner who basically needed somebody to run his sort of family office, very shipping focused, but various other investments as well. This was in the mid-teens, and we started buying container ships and sold them sort of towards after COVID. And that trade was finished, and the fellow who I was working for decided that it was time to more or less retire, as he had every right to do. And so I came here and joined Tristar, working for a man called Eugene Main, who's the founder and group CEO of Tristar. And Tristar is a homegrown shipping company, but also it acquired in 2016 the Emirates Ship Investment Company, which was established in Abu Dhabi some time ago. So currently we operate about 30 ships. We own most of them. They're mostly tankers, but over time we've also owned pretty much everything from bulkers through to LNG carriers. We're a fairly diverse team here. And what we do is we focus on long-term time charters to typically AAA counterparties like oil majors and governments and people like that.
Nice. So you've developed a very well-rounded and global career in maritime, and sort of having a perspective from many different angles. When in your career did you really start focusing on the seafarers behind shipping? When did it sort of become apparent to you? Because you have this conference which we're going to talk more about. But when did it sort of come apparent to you? Was it at Tristar, for example, where they became such an important stakeholder and it became incredibly prevalent?
It was really early on. I had the good fortune of starting my career around about the time that ISM was being implemented. And
Okay.
every seafarer will know his way around ISM. But in the early days, nobody did. It was all guesswork. And we had the ISM code, which we were compelled to comply with. And I had the good fortune of being on the team that sort of wrote applied the code to our business. And what that meant was that as a relatively young guy in our industry, I had to understand how shipping companies operated and how shipboard operations function and how ships themselves functioned. And in order to do that, I spent a lot of time on ships, dealing with seafarers and getting to know them and getting to understand their life and how they work and the hazards they face every day. and the fact that they're away from home for long periods of time, that it's a fairly potentially a fairly lonely existence. So on a very and ISM is intrinsically a human care code. Of course, it looks after the environment and after the property of the vessel, but ultimately it's all about human behavior. And so I had the good fortune of doing that early in my career and really opened my eyes to what these people at sea do for us every day. They're the enablers of world trade. Without them, we would be hungry and cold. And we rarely recognize the contribution that these men and women provide society. They occupy a very important part within the global supply chain, and society has very little recognition for what they do, primarily out of ignorance, not because of intent. But most people have never seen a ship, and they don't understand where their food and energy comes from.
Yeah, this is this.
So for that reason, I got interested in seafaring and seafarers. And Tristar, meanwhile, started many years later, 20 years later nearly. I started working here, which had already instituted the Safety at Sea conference. And the fact that we had have a meeting of the minds is a very happy coincidence, because it gives me the ability to do something I care about. And of course, it serves the interests of our business.
100%. And I think there are two very important points that you've raised there. The first is it astounds me, and I'm a young guy just coming into the industry, only been working in it for 3 or 4 years now, but it astounds me just how big the gap is between the wider public understanding where the stuff comes from and the seafarers. They have, there are many people who don't even know what a seafarer is.
That's right.
Which I think is just astounding. But the second thing that you started to touch up on that is safety. One of the things I heard you say was you believe safety isn't just a protocol, but it's a mindset, right? And this idea of getting safety right serves as a foundation to everything else in maritime operations. Can you just tell me a little bit more about safety as a mindset as opposed to just a protocol?
Well, we have this, of course, everybody understands the protocols. Here's how you deal with a lifeboat, or here is how you do hot work safely, or these are the forms that you have to fill out for enclosed space entry. But these are a symptom of a broader notion of operating in a safe work environment. And the broader notion is one that is conceptual. It's having the attitude that safety comes first. And this is the core of what I suppose we now call safety culture. Safety culture is what you really want to inculcate in your daily life to some extent, but also in the way your seafarers operate. And this is an attitude where it's not just physical safety, but also mental health and environmental safety and all these other things that come together. And the reality is there are two sides of this. There's the human side, which is nobody likes to see somebody else get hurt. The damage done to families, the damage done to the person, him or herself, is oftentimes permanent, and the damage is incalculable. There's no monetary sum that can recover some events of harm. The other aspect, of course, is financial, where if you avoid insurance incidents, you end up with a better balance sheet. And it's that simple. So the fact is, if you're able to get people operating in a way where, of course, they have to do their jobs. I mean, the safest thing, of course, would be to never go to sea, but this is an impossibility, right? If you can get people to get into the mindset that they aren't just doing a job, but rather they're occupying an important position in whatever role that they're doing, and that role must be performed. But first things first, it must be performed in the correct way. It's not just a matter of hammering a nail through a board. It's also a matter of making sure that the board is stable, that your thumb isn't in the way, that you know how to use a hammer, that you're wearing the right PPE. All these other things come first. Otherwise, you end up losing a thumb. It's not worth it, right? No nail is worth a thumb, right? To use a slightly ridiculous analogy, but the principle is that if you get the safety right, you get everything right. And so that's the first thing that we like our crews to think about. Now, the reality is I can talk from here in my office in Dubai, and the distance between here and the daily life of these men and women on our ships is totally remote from what I'm doing. And so implementation is quite difficult. They've got a job to do. They know it. They're professionals. And like every professional, they have confidence in their own abilities. It's well deserved. But nonetheless, we have to do everything we can to enable them, either through training or environment, to make sure that they're operating in a safe way.
How important is the role of the captain when it comes to leadership and developing a safety culture on board? How important is the role of the captain?
It all comes from senior leadership. If the leaders aren't talking the talk, so to speak, or walking the talk, then it's just lip service. And nobody's going to follow a leader who isn't acting the way he says others should act. It's disingenuous otherwise.
So have Tristar focused specifically on working on sort of leadership mechanisms with your officers to sort of develop that safety culture across the rest of the vessels?
Well, across the industry, there are various protocols and various ways of encouraging safer behavior. And so there's already a basic training aspect to how seafarers come up through the ranks. But we're working on ways of improving that. In particular, I mean, so periodically, for example, our crews get together in various places close to home during their shore leave and go through safety training incidents. We typically do sort of incident recaps, and they might concern a working from height incident, or they'll concern a mooring incident, or these sorts of things. And they're pretty good because they teach specific skills, but they provide awareness for specific events that have happened that people can then consider when they're back on board and doing their day-to-day job. But that doesn't solve the problem, and it doesn't promote a real safety culture. It provides skills, but it doesn't change attitudes.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. And the other aspect is that it doesn't address mental health issues that we know are prevalent on board ships. So one of the many things that we're doing is trying to address those issues in a slightly more effective way. And the reality is it's very difficult to address some of these topics in an open forum. It has to be done quite personally, because ultimately you're talking about fairly intimate things, or considering fairly intimate things, the people's darkest thoughts, so to speak. And so these have to be addressed in a very careful way. And frankly, a guy like me is not qualified to address this issue and educate people. This is for mental health professionals to address. So one of the things that we're doing now, for example, is getting mental health professionals to provide not just phone-in services, but also that we're bringing mental health professionals into our periodic conferences of seafarers while they're on leave. And these initially what we're addressing is suicide risk, because ultimately that's the most important one. How do you spot suicide risk, and how do you observe your how do you look after your shipmates is the goal of that set of learning. So yes, we're addressing it. There is not a well-known protocol for how to do this, so we're sort of making it up as we go along, but we're taking advice from and using the resources of Mission to Seafarers, for example, in their Safe Talk program. We'll see. The challenge with these things is that you don't know that you're doing it badly until there's an incident, and that is the wrong time to start fixing the problem. So what we're trying to do is fix a problem that we'll never know whether or not we've fixed, and that would be ironically the right result.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's incredibly difficult to measure the real success. But I guess given the fact that you are now coming up to I believe your 7th year of running the Safety at Sea conference, that's kind of enough time to get a feel for, are seafarers seeing value in this conference? What is the feedback you're getting? Is there any data you're collecting? Is there anything you can sort of share with us in the success you've had so far with the Safety at Sea conferences?
Well, it's interesting. I don't know of any other forums that are constructed like this. And in this sort of sharing of information and knowledge, we sort of, I mean, to use a slightly ridiculous analogy, we sort of get on stage and we take our clothes off and we say, look, this is what happened to us this year. And most people are pretty shy about doing that. But I think it's important that we communicate the problems that we have. We're very happy. It's easy to communicate success, but really you only learn from failure. And so it's important to be open about failure. So in the last, every year, look, it's great to get a couple hundred people together and talk about these topics because we learn from them. I hope they learn from us. Last year, we began our conference. The first 10 minutes or so was telling people about what we had learned from them, telling the audience about what we had learned from them over the last 6 conferences at that point. And it took a long time to go through all these things that we had learned and implemented. So that's quite interesting from our point of view, because it means that we can do our jobs better, and I hope it means that the people in the audience can do their jobs better too. The real sign of success, though, of safety at sea is the fact that every year we get the roster of people being involved gets higher and higher, and it gets better and better. Last year, for example, we had Karen Davis, the managing director of OCIMF, leading one of the panels, basically a third of the day, a third of the conference. This year we have Graham Westgarth, the chairman of the V Group, running a meaningful portion of the day, and Wada Ghanem, he's a published expert on seafarer leadership. Works for Enoch, running another third of the day. So, really high level people who are real experts with extraordinary knowledge are now contributing to this effort. And that is, to me, that's the most exciting aspect. So that's the most exciting indicator that we're getting a few things right. By no means getting everything right, but we're getting the bones of this organization right. The president of the Safety at Sea Conference is Dr. Graham Westgarth, who is formerly the head of shipping at Shell. He runs a charity called Together in Safety, which is very focused on seafarer safety. In fact, solely focused on seafarer safety. His golden rules, I think, are sort of setting the standard across basic safety management across our industry. So, we have these sort of we have these sort of box office names involved at this point in safety at sea, which is very exciting for me because these people carry a lot of weight. Their voice is heard around the world. They're well-known people who are real authorities in their field. So that's very exciting, and that means that we're getting something right.
Sure. But from like a Northern Star perspective, the direction that you guys really want to get to is ultimately a zero incident culture, which is incredibly bold ambition. But are you seeing that these conferences are moving towards that direction? Do you ever foresee a year, for example, where there are zero incidents?
So, well, let me comment firstly on the notion of a zero incident culture. The fact is, humans make mistakes. It's in our nature. So there's no such thing as a zero incident world. But by zero incident culture, what we mean is that one incident is too many. Some KPI, you look at key performance indicators from ship managers, for example, and they'll say, well, we expect that there will be 2 incidents a month or whatever it is, right? And I obviously not very serious incidents, but we expect that there will be a series of incidents. Just on average, there's this many, and we accept it. It's how it works in our industry. It's just life. Get over it. No, we don't accept that. We reject that principle. You can have a zero incident culture where you say the right number of incidents of whatever type is 0. And what that means is that one incident isn't just how it works in our industry, and it isn't just the way things are, and it isn't acceptable. Right? Zero incident culture means that every incident is a problem, and not that you accept a certain number of events. Sort of define a zero incident culture as being one where there's zero acceptance of incidents, rather than one where you actually believe that there will be no incident. One has to be realistic. Humans make mistakes. Again, people are shy about failure, and I talk to our P&I insurers fairly frequently. I ask them for data. There's an interesting problem in our industry where we don't talk about incidents, but we also don't, in part because we don't record them in a uniform way. So you talk to one insurer and they'll record an incident in a very different way from how another insurer will record that incident. We don't have a common language. Because we don't have a common language, we have no means of measuring performance. And because we have no means of measuring performance, we have no means of managing it. So we've ended up in a scenario where, annoyingly, it's very difficult to identify series of an incident type and classify various incident types in a way that we can start to efficiently attack them. What Graham Henderson is doing at Together in Safety has achieved some element of classifying incidents. Therefore, he's provided a means by which we can start to address some of these issues. But until we have a common language, as they do, for example, in the airline industry, which has seen tremendous success in imposing safety standards. Until we have a common language, we're going to struggle to really attack these issues head on.
Yeah, that's a gap there that somebody definitely needs to fill because that data would be incredibly important
Correct.
for the industry as a whole. One of the issues I found when I've done ship visits and spoke to seafarers, regardless of nationality, is sometimes the hierarchy can create a little bit of conflict. A rating might be afraid to speak up about a specific situation in case they anger the officer, and that has some kind of repercussion later down the line. When it comes to safety reporting as a whole, how do you sort of tackle this hierarchy situation?
You're absolutely right. There are different cultures operate in different ways, and yet on board you have all these cultures mixed together oftentimes, and they do behave very differently. And some cultures, for example, tend to sit back and not necessarily speak up. Other cultures are overbearing and perhaps speak too much. So one sees this often. It's difficult to fix people's innate personality, obviously. But the danger, as we often say here, danger doesn't respect your rank. It doesn't care. And risk doesn't care about how much experience you have. And so it's important that safety issues be removed from those hierarchies. Obviously, the operation of a vessel these are high value assets that need to be controlled in a mature and sophisticated way. They're very complex machines that need to be run by people with a lot of experience. So the hierarchy matters. But when it comes to safety, there's no such thing as hierarchy. And one of the things we do is we try to get guys to sort of junior guys to raise issues with their seniors, and we also encourage senior officers to be very open-minded about safety, because nobody has a monopoly on wisdom. How effective are we? I don't know. Again, it's always a challenge of implementation. Certainly from our point of view, my point of view, and I think that the point of view of most of my peers, is that we don't care what rank you are. If you're observing a matter that relates to the safety of your shipmates or the vessel or the environment, you got to speak up. It's part of your job. It's not a right to speak up. It's an obligation. But again, there are these cultural differences between people where sometimes that's difficult to overcome.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's something that I've seen a lot, not just around safety, but around all sorts of incidents that can happen on board a vessel.
Yeah.
There really is a cultural barrier sometimes. And some people, like you said, just sit on it, others they act. But I guess when it comes to safety, where one decision, missing one thing can cost lives and cost millions and millions of dollars, it's imperative that we find a way of being able to break those barriers down.
That's right.
In terms of the future, thinking macro now, what do you envision for, say, the next 5-10 years, not just for Tristar, but as an industry, where we can sort of reach a point where life at sea is one that is of, optimal safety, optimal well-being, optimal performance? Of course, incredibly expeditious seafarers, but of course, accepting that humans will always make errors. But what is that sort of North Star optimal future that you would like us as an industry to work towards?
That's a very difficult question to answer. The changes that are taking place on board vessels in terms of technology and regulation are not, in all cases, don't appear to be reflected in the way seafarers are currently trained in all cases. So a lot of people are going to see who don't necessarily understand the changes that are taking place literally under their feet, and there's a gap in seafarer training versus maritime technology at the moment, and the way the industry is going. So I think it's important that we fill that gap, because if we don't fill it, there will inevitably be safety gaps. And the obvious ones, for example, are seafarers who are not trained to use a certain fuel, and we can imagine a disastrous scenario if in the case that there were an incident in relation to that. So I think that strikes me as fairly important. A lot of people are talking about automation, and obviously nobody's going to get hurt if there's nobody on board. I go slightly the other way. When I started my career, vessels had radio officers on board. Given the amount of regulatory work, paperwork, various official response requirements now put on board ships, it almost makes sense to put an additional seafarer back on who is the communicator, who's the guy or woman who's in charge of public relations, if you will, because that person would also be in a position to lead some of these efforts towards ensuring that seafarers were fit for the increasing velocity of change that is coming their way. Now, is that going to happen? Probably not, because ultimately we're businesses and we're economically focused. But there is definitely a gap in the current crew matrix when it comes to these sorts of very important functions that are primarily administrative.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the innovation, generally speaking, within maritime as a whole is so rapid that actually keeping up with training is a very incredibly difficult task.
It's a real challenge. Real challenge.
And sometimes that can really, really indict fear in seafarers because, they may finished 3 years of studying, focusing on steam engines, for example, and then they come on board and they're being told about future autonomy. It's like, the gap is so vast. Even here in where I am in the UK, I live just down the road from one of the most prestigious maritime schools, Warsash, which is a fantastic school here in the UK. And I regularly speak to the cadets there, and they're not being told anything about autonomous shipping whatsoever.
Yeah, and they certainly haven't been taught about Fuel EU.
Exactly.
Right? There are all these things coming down the road that they're going to have to know about, respond to, and be intelligent about. There's a real gap at the moment.
I totally agree. Tim, to close the podcast off, I'm aware that sometimes when we speak about seafarers, we talk about all the bad things. We talk about a lot of negativity, but I do still believe that this is an incredibly fantastic career for young people, and I think it'd be interesting to hear from your perspective. We live in a world nowadays where young people, regardless actually of their nationality, have more choice than ever. Nowadays, people in Africa, people in the Philippines, people in India, they have access to cheap internet, and there is options online to have pretty much. There's so many ways to make money nowadays. Why do you think that in 2025, 2026, a young 18-year-old should consider a life at sea? What are the sort of, from a recruitment perspective, what are the sort of values that one will receive that is respected from a shore-based perspective that perhaps you wouldn't acquire otherwise, and that makes you a valuable asset to the employers of this world when it comes to being a seafarer?
Well, initially, it's probably the most interesting career you can have as a young woman or man. You get to see the world, and you get to deal if you're minded towards if you're minded towards engineering or any form of sort of tangible physical career, then seafaring is extraordinary. I mean, you look at what these guys get to do. They take on a lot of responsibility relatively early in life. They meet people from all sorts of different cultures. They interact under duress in scenarios that most people much older than them would never understand or be involved in. So they mature very quickly. Their skill sets they have soft skills and hard skills that are developed in tandem. And that's very unusual in the modern world, where across the economy, people tend to be specialists, either in whatever field they go into. But seafaring is great because it requires a broad set of skills in a high pressure environment, and that's where people get really good at things, right? And so I think from that point of view, it's quite interesting. More broadly, what we do as an industry is extraordinary. We feed the world, and without us, populations wouldn't grow because they'd be hungry, and economies wouldn't thrive because they wouldn't have any power. And our social purpose is amongst the more important ones. And I think that I get a lot of satisfaction by being involved in the system that enables society to grow and to be healthier and to be better. And every seafarer, regardless of what ship they're on or whatever it is that they're doing, is similarly contributing to what is, in my opinion, a very important social purpose. So I think there are two sides of it. It's a very unusual career and very unique. these days it's not like it was 30 years ago where you'd sign onto a ship and you'd say goodbye to your family for 10 months. It's now a scenario where you have to live on WhatsApp for 4 months or video conferencing for 4 months when the connectivity is completely different now from how it was even 5 years ago. So it's not as isolating a career as it used to be. And so I think it's you look at you rightly observe that many people from very different backgrounds can access different careers at this point. So can people from traditionally non-seafaring backgrounds now look at shipping as a possible career path. And if you're good on board and you come ashore at some point, then the world is your oyster. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. Our industry is wonderful because it's completely global. We're everywhere all the time, and we know people all over the world, and we interact with them every day. And it's a great privilege and a pleasure to have that kind of a cosmopolitan approach to the world.
Very well said. Thank you so much for your time, Tim. Tim, regarding the conferences, is this content only open to Tristar seafarers, or is this content open to the industry?
No, this is something that we do for everybody. This is our contribution to our industry, and everybody can log in. And I've forgotten the URL, but I think it's conferences.tristar.ea, or you can find it if you Google Tristar conference, Tristar Safety Conference. I'm sure you can find it.
Yeah,
you will find. Yep, great. On there, you'll find recordings of all of our previous conferences and details of the upcoming one.
Do you know when the next one is?
November 10th.
Perfect. Okay.
Yep.
Log that in, everybody. November 10th. Thank you so much, Tim, for your time. Great speaking to you.
Carl, thank you for the venue. It's great to be here.
See you. Bye-bye.
Take care.